Which Denver Broncos edge rusher will lead the team in sacks here in 2022? And why might it be good for the Broncos if that person is Bradley Chubb? Plus, we take a look and we project which interior defensive lineman will lead the team in sacks, who will lead the team in tackles, and all that and much more on today's Filthy Casual Friday episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, senior Broncos analyst at Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Both of us also cover the Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News and Broncos country. Once again, welcome into a very, very special Filthy Casual Friday episode. Thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast, or if you're watching us on YouTube, we appreciate you so much and hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're at all across Broncos country. Sarah, the exercise continues on here this week. We're going to conclude it with Broncos edge rushers, maybe how many sacks they're going to get, who will lead the team in sacks, taking a look at the defensive line, which position player from that group will lead the team in sacks, plus which defensive player will lead the team in tackles. This has been a pretty fun one that a lot of people in Broncos country have engaged with us.
I love it. I love making these kind of projections. It's fun to kind of start thinking about the season. And speaking of team leaders, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out Cody is rocking the Nathan Scott One Tree Hill original, the jersey from one of the most underrated shows. Look, people, according to Cody, if you got HBO Max, you've got access to One Tree Hill. So get on that. It's the off season of the NFL. So watch some One Tree Hill, binge it. But I'm excited to talk about these pass rushers, Cody. I absolutely love this group the Broncos have. I was just writing an article today just about, man, what's going to be the toughest position groups to make the roster. If you're a back end of the roster guy, I feel like the edge rusher group is going to be one of those position groups where, I mean, if you're number 6, if you're number 7, you might be somebody else's number 2 or number 3, to be honest. But man, on the Denver Broncos, it's going to be tough. So this is a fun group to think about all the possibilities. And I think talking about who's going to lead this team in sacks, I think we finally have a great discussion on our hands. Von Miller, obviously gone. Bradley Chubb, now fully healthy. So what's next for this Denver Broncos team? I can't wait to break it down.
Well, the edge rushers, this is the first training camp coming up on July 26th is when the team veterans and rookies report for training camp. First practice, July 27th. This will be the first training camp the Broncos enter without Von Miller, which is very, very weird saying it as we're writing our previews on our respective things at Mile High Sports, predominantly orange. Definitely something I was thinking about when I was running. It's like, man, this is definitely going to be different without Von. But you know what? The new era of pass rushers are here for this Broncos team, and it'll be on them to be able to get after the quarterback more so here in 2022. So, Sarah, let's open things up. Which Broncos edge rusher do we believe will lead the team in sacks here in 2022? I'll start things off right here. For me, I went with Bradley Chubb because, look, I think that when the stakes are high, Bradley Chubb is at his best. And I get everyone's concerned about his injury history, but he's actually entering training camp, which seems like for the first time in forever, fully healthy, Sayre, which, bodes well for him, for several other guys like Mike Purcell, who's going to be fully healthy. And if they can remain healthy, Sayre, I think that this Broncos team is so much more better with guys like Bradley Chubb being fully healthy. Now, the stakes are high because this is a make or break year for Chubb when it comes to a contract extension. And I still wouldn't even be shocked, even if he doesn't have like a big time season where he has like 20 sacks or even like 17 sacks. But if he has like 10 to 12 sacks, I could see the Broncos re-signing him. But for him, the pressure is on. He has to perform. He has to stay healthy. And I tell you what, a healthy Bradley Chubb with a chip on his shoulder is one I would not want to bet against there. So for me personally, I'm choosing Bradley Chubb as the person I believe will come in and lead the Broncos edge rusher group with total sacks here in 2022. Now, I wanted to ask you on your end, we kind of went with some opposites here. Both of our guys have a lot to prove here in 2022. Who is your option at the edge rusher position who you think will lead the team in sacks?
Oh, I'm taking Randy Gregory, and I think definitely you could see multiple guys for the first time in what feels like forever, multiple guys having double-digit sacks on this Broncos roster. And for Randy Gregory, that would be a career first. He's never done that before. His career high in sacks is 6, which is kind of crazy. You watch him play last year for the Dallas Cowboys, and of course there was only so many sacks to go around, right? Obviously DeMarcus Lawrence wasn't healthy all year for them, and Micah Parsons had a ton of sacks, and then you had Randy Gregory, you got other guys coming off the edge. So there was not enough sacks to go around in Dallas last year apparently. But I think Randy Gregory, Cody, he's poised to have the best year of his career. At least I think he's got to. Right now you've kind of established that, hey, I can stick around in the NFL. I can stay out of the the issues that he's had with suspensions in the past and injuries. He's proved that he can stay on the field. Now the question is, can you become a dominant force off the edge? And the Broncos certainly paid him as such, right? I mean, they stole him away from the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys had tweeted out, we've re-signed Randy Gregory to a 5-year deal. And then all of a sudden comes a report from Vic Lombardi, I believe it was, right?
Yeah.
Who tweeted out that the Broncos had signed Randy Gregory. And so obviously George Payton and the Broncos, they had plenty of chances to go for Von Miller. They could have gone for Chandler Jones. They could have gone a number of different Hassan Reddick even was a name that many threw out there. I think Randy Gregory being their top priority kind of surprised a lot of people. So I think he's got to go out there and lead the team in sacks, or at least come close. But I do see 2 guys with double-digit sacks at the very least for this Denver Broncos defense in 2022. Let's hope for a healthy season for both of these top 2 guys, Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb.
Well, I can tell you this. I think that things will be very good for this Broncos team if the guys that we mentioned, Bradley Chubb, Randy Gregory, if they both have double-digit sacks in 2022, things are in a good place for the Broncos considering their offense with who they have now with Russell Wilson. And Broncos country, let us know in the comment section down below or tweet us on Twitter if you believe that there's another pass rusher like Baron Browning, Malik Reed, or Jonathan Cooper who you feel like will have more sacks this season than the guys that Sayre and I mentioned. Let us know in the comment section down below who you believe out of the edge rusher position will lead the team in sacks in 2022. But Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, we're going to transition now to the Broncos defensive line. When we look at the edge rushers as we just did, how do the guys on the interior that are going to be trying to create that pressure from the inside, how many sacks will they have and who will be the leader in the clubhouse there? We debate and we discuss coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about betonline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest developments in sports, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball season, plus NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we continue on this filthy casual Friday episode, Locked On Broncos are playing a little fun game as to projecting who will be team leaders at specific positions in team production. We just talked about the edge rushers and which players we believe will lead the team in sacks. Now let's focus on the interior of that defensive line. We're talking about the defensive ends and the defensive tackles. Which players do Sayre Bedinger and myself think will lead the team in sacks at that position this season? Plus, we also want to know what you think. So make sure you comment along here in the live chat or in the comment section or tweet us on Twitter. Sayre, I'm going to say, like, hey, let's open this up. We were looking all week long. We've kind of been the opposite in terms of selections throughout the week. This is the one time where I feel like we've been very similar. And of course, when we take a look at the defensive line, a multitude of players, we talk about Mike Purcell being fully healthy, new acquisition in DJ Jones, rookie additions like Ioma Uwazurike and Matt Henningsen. And then you factor in a guy who's just been an absolute bully on the defensive line, Dre'Mont Jones. And that was both yours and my selection here on who we believe out of the defensive line group will lead the team in sacks here in 2022. So I'm going to open up for you. Why did you choose Dre'Mont Jones?
Well, I think one of the first and foremost things for why I'm picking Dre'Mont Jones, obviously he's got the talent. Obviously he's proven that he can go out there and rush the quarterback. He's done that on a variety of occasions. He can get to the QB. We know that, but he's in a contract year, and not that he's going to just flip on a switch because it's a contract year. We know that he's played well leading up to this point, but the contract year thing for Dre'Mont Jones, he's going to go out there and he's going to earn that second contract or the franchise tag, one of the two. I think he's going to go out and have a huge season, Cody. He could be one of maybe 2 or 3 guys on this team with double-digit sacks. It wouldn't surprise me if he was able to reach that mark, even considering, I mean, that's rare for interior defensive linemen these days to get double-digit sacks, but I could see Dre'Mont Jones being that type of guy. We've seen stretches of absolutely dominant play from him. Ask the Detroit Lions about Dre'Mont Jones. I'm sure they'd
Oh,
love to
yeah.
have him on their roster. But I mean, this guy is an absolute force on the inside. And so just as he's grown in his craft, as he's grown in his game, we know he's big, we know he's strong, we know he's quick. But man, I just think he's going to close the deal a lot more now that he's in it's crazy to think he's in year 4, which is bizarre because it feels like the Broncos just drafted Dre'Mont Jones, but here we are. He's in year 4. I think he's going to have a huge season this year. And I know you and I are in agreement on that. This and Russell Wilson leading the team in passing statistics. I think you and I are in full agreement on that. These are the 2 things that are almost certain to happen for the Broncos in 2022.
You mean to tell me there's a possibility Russell Wilson isn't leading the team in passing touchdowns this season? Oh, that'd be interesting. No, I completely agree with you. And, ever since he came out of the Ohio State, as they had trademarked, which is a very bold move by Ohio State, by the way, for Dre'Mont Jones, Sayre, when we talk about disruptive inside forces, everyone thinks about Aaron Donald. They think about Cam Hayward. But I think that this year in 2022, Dre'Mont Jones can put himself in that category. And I think a lot of the reason why Dre'Mont maybe doesn't get as much recognition as I believe that he should is because it's not showing up in sack numbers, right? But I think there's a metric that I think is super, super important that gives a little bit more clarity as to what type of disruptive player he is. And he even said it in this offseason. He said, if you watch the tape, I'm consistently disruptive. It ain't all about sacks, but it's about being disruptive. And I believe I am that consistently. He was an absolute disruptive force last season. In 2021, he had 21 total quarterback pressures last year, and he had 11 quarterback knockdowns. So times where, he pressured the quarterback, which either forced them out of the pocket, forced them to rush a throw. He also knocked them in the dirt 11 times, and he also sacked Jared Goff twice in one game. Jared Goff has nightmares about Dre'Mont Jones. I think for him, with how strong he is there, and we've seen it, he is a force. When he engages and he locks, he can shed tackles. He could shed offensive guards. He can shed these double team blocks. And he can get in the backfield and disrupt. And I think when you add guys that are healthy like Mike Purcell around him, DJ Jones, this might be the year we really see Dre'Mont Jones really take off. And I think that makes a great case for maybe why I believe and why you believe he will lead the team at that position on the defensive line in sacks here in 2022 in Broncos country. We want to know, do you agree with us? Do you disagree? Do you think a player like Mike Purcell or DJ Jones will have more sacks here in 2022? What about Ioma Uwazurike or Matt Henningsen, the Broncos rookies? Will McTelvin Agim be on the roster, and will he be in the running maybe to have the most sacks on the defensive line? We are eager for your thoughts and your feedback here on the Locked On Broncos podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube or your favorite podcasting provider. But coming up here in just a moment, we're going to transition now to talking about the defensive side of the ball, in which we believe which player on the defense will lead the team in tackles. This is at the defensive line, linebacker, and the secondary. Any player is applicable. We break that down coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me just tell you, hey, tonight could be a very special night if you are a Colorado sports fan. The Avs are up 3-1 over the Tampa Bay Lightning after an exciting victory on the road in Game 4 just the other day. Game 5 at Ball Arena kicks off tonight. And make sure you check out the Locked On Avalanche podcast leading up to where the Avs could win the Stanley Cup final in Denver, Colorado. So an exciting time for Denver sports fans. Make sure you check out the Locked On Avalanche podcast for coverage of tonight's game. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's Filthy Casual Friday episode of Locked On Broncos, we're talking about the defensive side of the ball, defensive leaders. And all week long, we've been playing this game. We've played it with the running backs, who we believe will lead the team in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, receivers, who will lead the team in receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and also the secondary, who's going to lead the team in takeaways, the lowest passer rating allowed, and passes defense. Make sure you check out those previous episodes if you have yet to do so. Locked On Broncos, we have you covered every single day all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. All right, Sayre, this is the fun part. This is the final part as to our little game building exercise that we've done so far here this week. Which Broncos player on the defensive side of the ball will lead the team in tackles? I'm going to have you start things off.
Definitely. I'm going to go for kind of an off the wall pick here. I think that there's a couple of guys that would be more obvious in this, but I'm going to go with Jonas Griffith, the potential breakout candidate at the inside linebacker position. He's just had a lot of hype building around him this offseason, hasn't he? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about him going back to right before the NFL draft. There was reports that, man, he really impressed the coaching staff and he really impressed the front office during OTAs, which obviously it's not full contact, it's not padded practices, but maybe just his digestion of the new defense and maybe just the way that he was in position, just getting into position and being able to be in the right spot at the right time. I think we saw just a really rapid ascent for him last season when he got into the lineup after the Broncos had kind of cycled through when Josie Jewell got hurt, Alexander Johnson got hurt. Then you bring in guys, all these different, just a host of other players, all the way down to Curtis Robinson on the practice squad before they finally turned to Jonas Griffith, who had been injured for a bit, and he just came out and he balled out, and he's even got recognition like you mentioned on the previous episode. I mean, Brian Baldinger started talking about him, started pointing him out on the tape, and so he's getting recognition from more than just the Broncos front office and coaching staff. I think with his range, his size, his athleticism, just the ability to kind of stay on the field for all three downs, I think Jonas Griffith has a chance to kind of surprise some people and maybe be the Broncos' leading tackler this season. I think that's, again, maybe an off-the-wall pick. We don't even know if he's going to be starting at this point for sure over Alex Singleton or whoever else. But I like that pick. Just kind of, let's take a shot. Let's throw one of these darts at the board and see if we can hit a bullseye there. I'm going with Jonas Griffith, and I think he's going to have a big season one way or the other.
Well, while you mentioned too that it may surprise some people, I honestly wouldn't be surprised there because look, we saw in 4 games last year. He started the final 4 games on the Broncos defense at the linebacker position, and he had 40 tackles in just 4 weeks of play. That right there, Sayre, to me is very impressive. We've heard a lot about him in organized team activities. We've heard a lot about him in mandatory minicamp. I would not be surprised if Jonas Griffith is the leading tackler, which brings me to my choice here because I don't think you could go wrong with Jonas Griffith. I went with Josie Jewell here, and the reason why last season for the Broncos, I think Josie Jewell was on par to lead the team in tackles through at least the first 2 weeks. Then he had that freak injury, the pectoral muscle, obviously in week 2, so it would have been really hard to tell. But last season, both Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons, those 2 guys were the top 2 tacklers on the team for the Broncos. And I'm a big believer if your safeties are leading the team in tackles, there's a little bit of an issue there. Now, I think we can kind of put it into perspective with how the Broncos defense played with rolling guys down. I think that, okay, maybe it makes a little bit more sense that, you had guys that had a little more tackles at the safety position there. However, you want your inside linebacker to primarily be the leading tackler. And we look at guys who are the most tackles in the NFL. I mean, go to Foye Oluokun, who's now with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was with the Atlanta Falcons. I believe he had almost 200 tackles last year. I think he was at 193 or 197. Unbelievable, right? You want your inside linebacker to be able to lead the league or lead the team in tackles. And I think that for Josie Jewell, if he stays healthy all 17 games this upcoming season, I think he bodes well in that regard because he's not really the primary linebacker that the Broncos are expecting to have this pass coverage responsibility. They want to use a lot of him against the run, and they want to use Jonas Griffith or Alex Singleton, in coverage against the pass. But then you mentioned Alex Singleton as well. Last year with the Philadelphia Eagles, he had 137 total tackles while starting some games for a very good Eagles defense and also contributing on special teams. I would not be shocked in the slightest if it returns a little bit of balance to the Broncos defense this year. If they stay healthy, where you have 2 of the inside linebackers leading the team in tackles, as it should be, because here's the reality of the defensive line. The defensive ends, the outside linebackers, they're not supposed to lead the team in tackles. However, they're supposed to open up opportunities. And this is why when you see an outside linebacker, a defensive tackle, or a defensive end do their job and command that attention, it allows a linebacker to fill their gaps. And if they fill it effectively, they will be the ones who will be primarily credited with stopping the run. And it all goes to the defensive line. I think that if those guys stay healthy, the linebackers behind them are going to eat. So for me, I'm going with Josie Jewell, the outlaw here this year, as who I believe will lead the team in tackles. Broncos country, let us know who you believe on the defensive side of the ball will lead the team in tackles here in the 2022 NFL season. That'll wrap up today's episode of the show, but we have a very special treat for you all throughout next week. Locked On Broncos as the offseason continues. Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're going to continue our series where we take a look at one specific player, and we compare that player at that position to the rest of the AFC West. So for Javonte Williams, where does Javonte rank amongst all the running backs inside the AFC West? We're going to play that game next week here on the Locked On Broncos podcast.